In this book, I have encountered a villain so profoundly unsettling and infuriating. Every time I read about him, my blood was boiling. I'm in the mood to vent about it, so let's dive in. Today we're going to be talking about Rose Madder by Stephen King. The protagonist in this book is Rosie Daniels, who is a victim of domestic abuse. She escapes from her abusive husband and starts a new life in a new city. When she arrives in the new city, it's not long before she discovers this mysterious painting in a pawn shop. And it serves as a gateway into another universe or another plane of existence that some of us constant readers and fans of Stephen King may be familiar with. As Rosie becomes more empowered and more independent and starts to rebuild her life, Norman becomes more obsessed with the idea of tracking her down. The more I read of Stephen King, the more I start to recognize a kind of familiar pattern, and that is the interplay between supernatural, otherworldly threats and more familiar everyday threats. So whether that is, for example, a demonic clown or vampires in Salem's Lot, it's always paired with another more familiar unsettling threats like bigotry or psychosis, or is the case in this book, domestic abuse. What's interesting to me is that I'm definitely finding the latter to be much more horrifying and more scary, more suspenseful. So I think I spoke about in my review of It that I didn't really find Pennywise to be so scary. But what I did find to be terrifying was Patrick Hockstetter and Beverly's husband and Beverly's father hunting them down. Those things felt real to me, and so they were a lot more scary. And that was the case also in Rose Madder. The supernatural elements were, interesting, but what was really, really... What really evoked a lot of emotions from me was Norman. And I think that's probably going to be the case for a lot of other readers as well. In terms of Stephen King's characters that I despise, Norman is right up there. He's up there with Rhea of the Coos. He's up there with Mother Carmody from The Mist. What I might do actually is, once I'm done on my journey to the Dark Tower and, I've read 23 or 24 Stephen King books, I might actually do like a ranking list of my most despised Stephen King characters, because he really does have a talent for creating characters that are easy to hate. One element of this book that really kind of stood out to me was the deep exploration into personal empowerment, especially for women who are trapped in abusive relationships. The main character's journey from being kind of meek and depressed to taking the time to rebuild herself, being given the tools and the utilities to rebuild and repair herself physically and mentally. It just made her a kind of character that was really easy to root for. There's so much darkness in this book, but also there are little beams of light as well. I think there's a Mr. Rogers quote, which I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but it goes something along the lines of, whenever you're down, whenever you're depressed, when you're scared, when you look around and you feel like the world is just getting darker and worse, look for the people who are helping. Look for the people who are taking time out of their day, because they're always there. Look for the helpers. And that will lift you up and remind you that there is light in the darkness. And that's what this book, I think, does really well. There are a lot of people in this book that are helping Rosie along in her journey. There are helpers. And this is something that I recognize now in a lot of Stephen King's books, the importance of community and kind of leaning on each other when we need to, whether it's the old folks in Insomnia and the community that they build and how they rally around each other, or whether it's the Losers Club in It and how they are all strong when one of the others are feeling weak. They can just lean on one another. The Quartet in the Dark Tower. And also in this book, Rose Madder, the daughters and sisters, I think it's called the Daughters and Sisters Home, or the Sisters and Daughters Home, and the community that they build as well. I think Stephen King recognizes that, we're all walking along our own path and we're all going to be alone at times, but all of us, no matter how strong we are, need help from other people sometimes. So I've already spoken a bit about Rosie and Norman and how I felt about them. There's some other characters in this book that I really liked. For example, Anna Stevenson, who is the head of Daughters and Sisters. She is a stoic kind of a person. She's no nonsense. And I felt like she is exactly the kind of person that you need around when you're really going through something. Also, Gert, she was fantastic. She is this kind of big person who is very strong, physically very strong, mentally very strong. And she's been through her own past trauma as well. And she's used that to kind of fuel herself and build herself up. And she kind of acts as a personal defense trainer and also security for the community of Daughters and Sisters. And then there's Cynthia, who really couldn't be any different to Gert. She's very small, very slight person, and she is like a ball of energy. She's really serving as like a comic relief in this book. But again, she's someone that's been through a lot. She's another survivor of domestic abuse. And yeah, I found it really easy to like her. Bill Steiner, he's the owner of the pawn shop where Rosie finds the painting. And he's like the love interest. I wasn't very interested in that. I got to be honest. The romance side of this, it was just so, there was nothing different about it. I didn't find it to be interesting, but I think it was essential because Rosie had to learn that actually not all guys are psychopaths. And so Bill Steiner was kind of like a reminder of that. But yeah, I didn't really care about the romance element of it that much. And another character that I didn't really care too much about was Rose Madder herself. She represents the supernatural element of this book. And yeah, kind of bland, honestly. In fact, about a third way into the book, this is when Rosie finds the Rose Madder painting, right? And for me, when things go from a woman trying to escape her abusive husband to the more supernatural Greek mythology aspect of the book, that is when it felt like the wheels started to fall off. That's when I started to sort of lose interest a little bit. The supernatural painting didn't seem to add anything to the main plot. Really, it served mostly as a distraction. I don't know what the purpose of finding this painting was, and maybe you can let me know in the comments. I know, for example, she saw Rose Madder as like a bastion of strength, like an idealized version of herself, and she could look to and think to herself, what would Rose Madder do? I understand, but I don't know. Is that justification enough for an entire new world, an entire new subplot? Couldn't she, for example, find one of the women at Daughters and Sisters to be that symbol of strength that she could look up to and try and emulate? For me, it really felt like Stephen King kind of started writing this book, got about a third of the way in and said, maybe this should have something supernatural about it. I can add something supernatural about it. I mean, I am Stephen King after all, and kind of known for this. So yeah, what could I do? Oh, maybe add something from the Dark Tower or the Talisman, try and have some sort of tie-in. Yeah, why not? It kind of felt forced. It felt forced. And so from this point on, I'm going to start talking about heavy spoilers, right? So I'm going to talk about my favorite scenes and the scenes that I didn't really like in this book. From this point on, spoilers. So the opening scenes I thought were fantastic. Difficult to read, like shocking, definitely. The level of abuse, like I mentioned, was absolutely horrific. I felt like I knew straight away, oh, I'm going to love this book, because the stakes are so high. I really like Rosie. I really hate Norman. She needs to get away. I understand exactly what's going on. Let's get on with it. I'm rooting for her. And then when Rosie escapes and she finds daughters and sisters and the warmth and camaraderie that she feels there, the new life that she's building, the fact that this whole section of the book, after such darkness, to find such a wholesome, nice, inviting environment, it just meant that when Norman started to hunt her down, it was even more pressing that we can't let him find her. We can't let him find her. And he wants to drag her back into hell. She's in heaven and he wants to drag her back into his own personal hell. And so, yeah, I mean, that was really terrifying. Also, all of the scenes where we are inside of Norman's head and hearing the hatred and the vitriol of his inner dialogue. He's actually so creative in all of the ways that he can find to hate people who aren't exactly like him. It was really astonishing that the names he was calling people are names that I've never heard ever. The ways that he's just denigrating people, he sees them himself as a man. And that's the best thing you can be. And then everyone else as some sort of subhuman, something below him. Even some of the cops, he's a cop, right? Even some of the cops that he works with, they're a lesser kind of cop. They're not like me, He was a real psychopath, and I just couldn't stop flipping the pages when anytime it was Norman's in a monologue, I was just crazy. Also, was it just me, or did it seem like Norman had his own set of supernatural abilities? It always seemed to be that he was 2 steps ahead, and it sort of made you wonder how much of his abilities were police training and a kind of natural instinct, and how much was something extra. He has a kind of animal instinct and a really deep understanding of human behavior. It's like he could kind of look behind your eyes and understand your true meaning. It seemed like he always had hunches that would pay off. He's always expecting himself to get lucky, and he does. And so this is much more than your typical psycho ex-husband story. He is drawing on forces that are darker and that do not seem of this world. And honestly, knowing that the story already had this kind of supernatural element baked in, I don't know why Stephen King even felt the need to include the painting. Look, I'm sure some people loved the painting and loved Rose Madder and everything like that, and good, But for me, if I could have my wish list of this book, I would just say, great setup, completely get rid of the painting, just completely forget about the painting and focus more on Norman and his special abilities, and sort of make him into a different kind of a predator, whether you want to say he has the touch or the shining or whatever it is. He's got this special ability and he is a hunter, and it makes him perfect for hunting down women and destroying everything around him. That would have been a story that I would have really enjoyed a lot more than I did this one. All of the scenes where Norman finally catches up and sort of moves into the vicinity of where Rosie has set up her new life, and he just starts to wreck everything, just sort of knowing that Norman cannot live in a world where Rosie is happy without him. That is unacceptable for him. It just shows what a psychopath he is. And what he does to the guy in the bus station, the guy that works in the bus station that lets Rosie know where the women's shelter is, he was just this nice guy that was just helpful and wanted to help people who were in really precarious situations. And the next level of cruelty that Norman shows to this guy, again, I forget his name. It was horrific. It was really horrific. And it was more than just a crime. It was a message that Norman was sending to Rosie. You cannot escape, and nobody can help you. So Rosie finds the painting and she's really taken with it. It's kind of mysterious. And then through this painting, Rosie enters into what appears to be Midworld. And the reason that I think it's Midworld, it has to be, is that Rose Madder mentions the city of Lud. In the Dark Tower, we've been to Lud before, right? Beyond that, I can't really make many more connections between Rose Madder and the Dark Tower series. Maybe some of these characters that we've met appear later on. That's possible in the Dark Tower series. Up until this point, I've only read up to Wizard and Glass before I started to move into the peripheral books in the multiverse. But yeah, it's possible that we meet Rose Madder or something like that later in the Dark Tower. But I couldn't really see too much connective tissue between this book and the Dark Tower series. To me, honestly, I saw a bigger connection between Insomnia, the world of Insomnia, and the world of Rose Madder, because Susan Day is mentioned in this book, and you can kind of make the connection between women that are under threat. There was also a woman's shelter in Insomnia as well, right? So yeah, I made more connections between Insomnia and Rose Madder. It was interesting to read this book directly, immediately after Insomnia. But yeah, I couldn't really see too many connections. Also, let me know if you agree with this or if you disagree. I'd be interested either way. But do you feel as though the inclusion of Rose Madder and her supernatural abilities kind of stripped away the revenge that belonged to Rosie, right? Because it seems like, yeah, fair enough, Rosie lured Norman into the painting, into the gateway, into Midworld, where Rose Madder effectively just consumed Norman with her abilities. And I don't know, I felt like Rose Madder didn't deserve the revenge that Rosie deserved it. And listen, you know, you can say, and rightfully so, I think, that you could say that Rose Madder is the twinner of Rosie. I think that's probably true. I'm not sure. Seems like that's true. And so I don't know. I just feel like the book spends a lot of time building up this cat and mouse thing between Rosie and Norman. And it builds up the tension. And so you're seeing Rosie become stronger and stronger and stronger. And then you want her to face off with Norman, face her fears, and for her to directly defeat Norman in some way, either outsmart him or to not be submissive to him. I don't know. It felt like I wanted her to score the match-winning goal, and in the end, she got an assist. And it's like, ugh. I mean, honestly, for me, the sweeter moment of revenge wasn't Norman's final demise, but it was actually when Gert came face to face with him. And before that fight resolved itself, I was really nervous because I really liked Gert. And I was thinking, oh my God, if Norman is such a psychopath, if he overpowers Gert, which he is capable of doing, this is going to be so dark and so depressing, you know? But that wasn't the case, thankfully. Gert was able to overpower Norman. The feeling of humiliation, of genuine fear that he felt, of helplessness, it really felt like he was getting a taste of his own medicine for the first time. And it was so satisfying. Even after it was all done, it left a psychological scar with Norman. He couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't stop visualizing being dominated, being owned by this woman, the way that he has done to so many other people, especially to Rosie. It felt really fitting. And I feel like maybe a better version, or I don't want to say a better version, but a version that I would have enjoyed more of this story is that Norman is left by Rosie. He can't handle it. He's got supernatural abilities that he's never really dug into. He makes a deal maybe with a supernatural entity, and then he hunts down Rosie using his new supernatural abilities. And when he finally faces off with her, she defeats him in some way, and then the entity sort of drags him down into his own version of like a personal hell where he is dominated and abused and humiliated by women and all the other people that he sees as less than him for all of eternity. And that would have deeply satisfied my soul. But again, I know that some people love this book and everyone's got different tastes. So yeah, I don't know. It definitely wasn't one of my favorite Stephen King books that I've read so far on my journey to the Dark Tower. What I'm going to do now is quickly give the ratings of this book, certain elements of it out of 5 stars, and then I'm going to talk about the next book that I'm going to be reviewing on my journey to the Dark Tower. Okay, so ratings. I'm going to give the plot of Rose Madder 2.5 stars. I think it started so strong. It was one of the best openings to any Stephen King book that I've read. One of, not the best, one of the best. But yeah, it just fell off about a third into the book. Just started to fall apart for me. The characters, I'm going to give 3 stars out of 5. And that is heavily being carried by Gert, by Cynthia, and by Norman, who, whilst I despised him, he was fascinating. The setting, I'm going to give 2 stars. No, nothing special about this setting. I would say it was interesting. The most interesting thing, I guess, was to see Midworld from another person's perspective. Actually, maybe I'll bump that up. I'll bump that up to a 2.5. Originality, I'm going to give this 3 stars for originality. And overall, I'm going to give Rose Madder 2.5 stars out of 5. It's a tough pill to swallow, honestly, giving this book 2.5 stars, especially after just reading Insomnia and giving Insomnia 2.5 stars. Yes, it's rough. It's a little bit of a dip in my joy of reading Stephen King, especially after, before these 2 books, I read The Mist, which I really enjoyed. I read Salem's Lot, which I really enjoyed. And then I read It, which I really enjoyed. Those 3 books, like, oh man, I was like, here we go. Things are warming up. And then Insomnia, Rose Madder. Didn't really like them that much. Now, if you wasn't already aware, I'm currently reading my way on a journey to the Dark Tower. It's 23 books in total, and Rose Madder was book 12 in my 23 book journey. And in my next review, I'm actually going to be reviewing 2 books because I have it on good authority that in some way these books are related to one another. And those books that I'm going to be reviewing next are Desperation and The Regulators. So I don't know. Hopefully these books are a return to form for Stephen King. I don't know how they're related to The Dark Tower. I haven't read them. I don't even really know what they're about yet. So I'm looking forward to diving into these books. And if you'd like to continue our journey together toward The Dark Tower, then you can click up here to see my reviews, my joint review of Desperation and The Regulators. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Happy reading.